There is a moment most of us have lived through, a moment that splits your understanding of another person cleanly in two. Before it, you thought you knew them. After it, you realized you never quite did. The shift is sudden, total, and deeply disorienting. Maybe it was a colleague you had trusted for years, someone you had vouched for and defended, working alongside without a second thought. Then one bad afternoon under real pressure, they shifted. Everything you thought you knew about them dissolved into something unrecognizable. Or maybe it was someone you were building something intimate with, someone who appeared warm and emotionally grounded and genuinely kind, until one real argument cracked the surface and revealed a person you had never actually met before in all that time. What that kind of moment produces is not just surprise. It produces a particular species of doubt that turns painfully inward on yourself. The question becomes unavoidable. Who was I actually dealing with this whole time? And what does it say about me that I missed it? The uncomfortable answer is that most of us are simply not as good at reading people as we believe we are day to day. We pay close attention to the wrong signals. We get charmed by confidence and mistake it for substance underneath the performance. We interpret someone's silence as depth and their social warmth as genuine character. And our radar is miscalibrated in exactly that way. Because our radar is miscalibrated in exactly that way, we keep getting caught off guard by the same kinds of people again and again. But there is a better way to read people, and it comes from one of the most rigorously observant minds in the history of psychology. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist born in 1875 who spent his career trying to understand the full totality of human mental experience. He called it the psyche, the full totality of a person's mental and emotional experience, both the parts we know and the parts we don't. Early in his professional life, he worked closely alongside Sigmund Freud, but Jung eventually parted ways with Freud's framework entirely. Jung believed Freud was too narrowly focused on repressed sexuality and early childhood trauma as the master keys to human behavior. Jung thought the unconscious mind was far larger, far more architecturally complex, and far more interesting than Freud had ever imagined. One of Jung's most enduring ideas was his concept of the persona. In ancient Roman theater, actors wore physical masks on stage. Jung borrowed that word to describe the social mask every human being constructs and wears carefully every single day of their life. The persona is the version of yourself you project into the world. How you want to be perceived at work, in relationships, on a first date. It is carefully assembled, strategically maintained, and to varying degrees, not entirely real in the way it is presented to others. Jung was not arguing that the persona is inherently dishonest or malicious. Social performance is a natural and necessary part of community life. You cannot move through the world in a state of total psychological exposure. That would be completely unsustainable for any human being. But the problem emerges when someone becomes so attached to their persona that they lose meaningful contact with who they actually are. That disconnection, Jung believed, is the root of most psychological suffering and most chronic interpersonal conflict between people. So the real question becomes, how do you get past someone's persona? How do you see the actual person beneath the performance they sustain? Jung identified two specific patterns in human behavior that reveal genuine character. Not the character someone performs, but the real one. The real character surfaces in unguarded moments, in quiet friction, in the spaces where the mask starts to shift and loosen unexpectedly. These patterns do not appear on a resume, or in someone's social media presence, or in the confident way they describe their ambitious goals. They live in much smaller, more honest places. And once you know what to look for, you will start recognizing them everywhere you go. The first pattern is this: pay close attention to what a person judges most intensely. Not mild annoyance, but something much stronger and stranger. What draws emotionally disproportionate, almost personal feeling criticism? The kind where someone's voice tightens and their energy completely changes. Jung called this psychological mechanism projection. Understanding how it operates will permanently change the way you listen to other people. Here is the core idea. Every one of us carries rejected parts of ourselves, traits we decided at some point in life were simply unacceptable. Maybe you were raised to believe that ambition was shameful, or that emotional need was weakness, or that self-promotion was a character defect. So those parts got pushed down, suppressed. You told yourself you were not like that, but rejected parts do not simply disappear at all. They go underground into what Jung called the shadow, the dark storage space of the psyche, where everything we cannot consciously accept gets quietly deposited. And what happens with that shadow material is fascinating, because we cannot acknowledge these rejected parts. We begin to see them in others instead. We project them outward, And then we judge those other people with unusual intensity for possessing the very qualities we hide in ourselves. The emotional charge is the signal. The more disproportionately intense someone's judgment of another person is, the more revealing it becomes. The more likely it is that they are looking at a piece of their own shadow, reflected back at them, through the other person they are judging. Picture a man in his mid-30s, a sales professional, who grew up in a household where money was always tight and wanting more was shameful. His parents worked hard and honest. From an early age, he absorbed the belief that ambition, real hunger for success, made you someone to look down on. So he learned to suppress his own drive. He told himself he was not like that. He worked hard, but always with a ceiling, limiting how far he pushed. Then a new colleague joins his team. She is openly ambitious. She advocates for herself without embarrassment, promotes her work, asks for what she wants. She is not dishonest or reckless. She is simply unashamed, and he cannot stand her. He talks about her constantly to whoever will listen. He tells colleagues she is fake, that she is only out for herself, that she does not deserve the recognition she gets from anyone around them. His reaction is wildly out of proportion to anything she has actually done to him. That disproportion itself is the signal worth paying attention to. What is really happening? She is not the problem. She is holding up a mirror. She is living openly the part of him that he buried decades ago. His own ambition, his own hunger, his own desire to go after more. It is all right there in her behavior, completely visible, making him deeply uncomfortable. His harshest criticism of her is really a message about himself, not about her at all. The sharpest arrows point backward toward the archer. This dynamic works in the other direction as well. And Jung noticed that people rarely discuss this less obvious side of projection at all. We project positive qualities too. Think of someone who consistently places certain people on pedestals, who talks about them with something close to worship. She is so confident, I could never do that. He just makes it look effortless. These phrases signal something specific about the speaker themselves. Jung would say that intense admiration projected onto others for specific qualities often reveals the projector's own undeveloped potential waiting inside them. The qualities they cannot stop admiring in someone else are often qualities they themselves carry, but have not yet claimed or allowed themselves to inhabit. The practice here is simple and applies to you as honestly as it applies to anyone else. When someone reacts with unusual intensity toward another person, ask yourself, what is the feeling beneath the feeling? And when you catch yourself doing the same thing, as you will, do not rush to self-judgment. Get curious instead. What part of you are you recognizing in that other person? What have you buried that is asking for your attention right now? This is genuinely uncomfortable territory if you let it fully land. Most of us move through life trusting that our judgments of others are accurate assessments of reality. We think we are simply calling things as we see them. But what Jung is pointing toward is that some of our most charged judgments are not about the other person at all. They are reflections. They are windows into our own unprocessed material. That does not mean your assessments of other people are always wrong or mistaken. Sometimes people genuinely are behaving badly, but the key marker is the emotional charge, the disproportionate intensity. That is the signal your shadow has entered the room. One practical way to begin working with this is to keep what might be called a trigger journal. Write down what got under your skin and exactly how it made you feel. Then sit with one honest question. Where might this same quality exist in me, even in a smaller or more concealed form? You do not have to share it with anyone, but the self-knowledge that comes from that kind of honest examination is among the most useful you will ever encounter in your entire life. The second character reveal is, in many ways, even more telling than the first. It is this. Watch how someone behaves when their carefully constructed image is threatened. Jung understood that maintaining a persona requires enormous ongoing psychological energy. Every day people work to keep their projected self intact and consistent. As long as circumstances cooperate, most people can sustain that performance reasonably well. But life does not always cooperate with our performance. Criticism arrives, mistakes happen, unexpected failures interrupt the narrative. And in those moments, when the ground shifts, the real person underneath surfaces. Think about people you know who handle setbacks with genuine steadiness. When something goes wrong, they own it. They do not point fingers immediately. They get quiet, or they ask honest questions about what could have been done differently. They stay fundamentally stable even when their circumstances did not. Now think of someone who completely unravels under pressure. When criticized, they attack. When they make a mistake, they find someone else to blame without pausing. When their competence is questioned, they become cold, dismissive, defensive. Jung would say that second person is showing you something no performance could obscure. They are showing you the gap between their persona and their actual self. And that gap is filled with unprocessed fear, insecurity, and unexamined emotional material. Consider a woman who has built her entire professional identity around being the calm one. The manager who never raises her voice, always steady and composed. Her reputation is wrapped tightly around this image of unshakable composure. And for a long time it holds without strain or visible difficulty. Then, in a quarterly review meeting, one executive begins pushing back on a project she led with pointed questions and honest concerns about outcomes. Something shifts in her almost immediately. Her answers become vague and deflective. Her voice gets clipped. She starts subtly pointing to where her team fell short. She even implies the executive who approved the project did not fully understand its scope at the time. The meeting ends awkwardly. People walk away changed. Two people on her team who witnessed it walk away, with a fundamentally different impression of her than the one they had carried in that morning. What happened? The pressure of having her image challenged activated her real psychological patterns. Her composure was never as deep as it appeared. It was a performance, and beneath it was someone with a genuinely fragile relationship to being seen as anything less than completely in control. Jung would not judge her for that. He would simply note this is what happens when someone never does the internal work of sitting with their own imperfections. The persona becomes increasingly rigid and increasingly brittle, because it must compensate for everything beneath it that has never been honestly integrated. What makes this especially important is that persona breakdowns do not only appear in high-stakes dramatic situations. They appear in small moments too, and those small moments are often more revealing precisely because people have less reason to be guarded in mundane, ordinary, everyday situations. Watch what happens when someone is kept waiting longer than expected. Pay attention to how they treat a server or customer service representative when things go wrong. Notice how they respond when their joke does not land, or when plans change at the last minute through no one's fault, or when someone pushes back casually. These micro moments are extraordinarily informative, because in those small flashes of inconvenience, the real person emerges before the performance can catch up. People who are genuinely secure, who have done real self-examination, tend to move through those moments without losing their footing in the clutter of life. They feel the discomfort, but it does not destabilize them. People who are performing security rather than actually having it tend to crack in exactly those micro moments. They often do not notice they are cracking because they are so focused on maintaining the image that they have no awareness of how they actually look when it fails. Once you understand both of these character reveals, you can use them together in something that might be called the integration test. It works simply this way. When you gently and respectfully reflect someone's projection back to them, how do they respond? This is not about confrontation or scoring a point at their expense. It is about opening a door through genuine curiosity, and what someone does with that open door tells you nearly everything about their actual capacity for growth. Turn to that ambitious colleague. Imagine someone quietly saying to him in a low-stakes moment, "She really seems to get under your skin." Do you ever wonder why? Watch for two possible responses. In the first, he gets defensive almost immediately. He says something like, "No, that is just who she is," and he shuts down completely. That response tells you he does not currently have much capacity for honest self-reflection. The same defensiveness will surface in every area of his life. In the second response, he goes quiet for a moment. Then he says, "Honestly, maybe. I think I might be jealous. I always kind of hold myself back." That is an entirely different kind of person. Someone with genuine self-awareness. Someone who can hold discomfort without collapsing into defensiveness at all. Someone genuinely capable of growth. Jung described these as the defended type and the integrated type, and the distinction between them matters enormously. Understanding which one you are dealing with is among the most practically useful things you can know about a person you are considering trusting. The defended type is not a bad person. They are simply operating from a place of psychological fear. Their identity is built entirely around a particular image. Anything threatening that image feels like an assault on their very existence. So they fight, flee, or freeze, defensiveness, withdrawal, or complete emotional shutdown. The integrated type has done the harder, less visible work of learning to sit with uncomfortable truths about themselves over time, with patience and honesty. They can hear criticism without it dismantling their sense of self. They can acknowledge their own contradictions. They can say honestly they are still working on it. It is worth being direct about something here. Most of us, depending on the day and the topic, fall somewhere between these two types in practice. There are areas where feedback lands with relative grace, and areas where the defenses still shoot up fast. We all have both territories within ourselves. The goal is not to become a perfectly integrated person who is never defensive and never projects. That is simply not a real human being at any stage of life. The goal is to become increasingly conscious of your own patterns, so they stop running you from the background without your awareness or permission. These two character reveals have immediate practical implications across every significant relationship in your life, in every context you inhabit daily. In workplaces, how your colleagues handle pressure and criticism is one of the most reliable indicators of what it will actually be like working with them over time. Someone who deflects blame, attacks the messenger, or shuts down when challenged will create chronic friction, not because they are bad, but because they operate unconsciously. On the other hand, someone who can absorb feedback without losing composure is someone you can actually build something real with over time. In romantic relationships, the shadow projection dynamic is enormous and often deeply underappreciated as a source of confusion and repeated conflict. Pay attention to how a partner or a potential partner talks about their exes. Pay attention to what they consistently criticize in other people over time, not to psychoanalyze them, but because it gives you genuine information about what they have not yet worked through in themselves at this point in life. If someone moves through life constantly surrounded by people who reveal themselves to be manipulative or draining, that pattern is worth sitting with carefully. Sometimes the world really does keep delivering difficult people, but sometimes the pattern of who keeps appearing says something important about what we attract unconsciously. In friendships, the persona breakdown moments are the most revealing of all. Most of us have friends who are wonderful during easy seasons and become unavailable or destabilized during the hard ones. That is not necessarily a moral failing, but it is information worth holding, honestly. It is worth being honest with yourself about whether you have built your closest relationships on performed versions of people rather than the real ones underneath. The most important place to direct all of this, however, is inward. Everything described here about reading other people applies with equal force to reading yourself. The intense judgment you carry toward certain kinds of people is pointing toward your own shadow. This applies to yourself as honestly as to anyone you observe. The way you respond when someone questions your work or your competence reveals the gap, or the absence of one, between your persona and your actual self. And the way you respond when someone gently reflects one of your patterns back at you is the integration test applied personally to you. Right now, most people find it considerably easier to see these patterns in others than in themselves. That is simply how we are built as human beings by nature. Our own blind spots are, by definition, invisible to us from the inside. But if you use what you observe in others as a prompt to turn the lens inward, something can begin. Jung spent much of his career describing a process he called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming more fully and authentically yourself over time. Not a more polished performance of yourself, your actual self, the one beneath the constructed mask, the one that includes both your strengths and your shadow, both the parts you are proud of and the parts you have been quietly hiding. Jung believed this journey was the most significant work any human being could undertake, not because it leads to perfection, but because it leads to something rarer and more durable, realness. And real is the only foundation worth building on. Real, Jung argued, is the only foundation on which genuine relationships, genuine contribution, and genuine peace of mind can actually be built and sustained. The shadow does not diminish when you ignore it. It grows louder and more disruptive and harder to contain the longer it is left, unattended and unacknowledged. But when you turn toward it, when you begin acknowledging the rejected parts of yourself with honesty and without self-condemnation, something starts to shift. The intensity of your projections decreases. Your persona becomes more flexible, less brittle. Your reactions under pressure start to reflect something more stable and grounded. One honest note before closing: every useful tool can be misused, and this one is no exception. There is a particular kind of person to be aware of here. There is a particular kind of person who discovers psychological frameworks and immediately repurposes them as instruments of superiority over others around them, going through life analyzing everyone, diagnosing their shadow, categorizing their defenses, using that knowledge to dismiss or manipulate the people around them. That is not wisdom. That is just a more sophisticated version of the same ego protection Jung spent his entire career trying to help people move beyond. The moment you believe you have fully figured out another person, you have actually stopped seeing them. You have replaced them with your concept of them. And that replacement is one of the most reliable ways to kill a real relationship. Use these ideas to generate curiosity, not conclusions about the people you encounter. Use them to grow your compassion for people who are struggling in ways they may not fully understand. Use them to examine your own patterns with more honesty. To bring it together, Jung identified 2 windows into authentic character that operate beneath the level of conscious control and cannot be easily managed or performed. The first is what they judge most harshly in others, because intense disproportionate judgment reveals what someone is buried in their own shadow below the surface. The second is how they respond when their image or competence is challenged, because real pressure reveals whether someone's composure is genuine or only performed. These patterns work because a person can manage their words, their expressions, their professional presentation, but they cannot manage these deeper patterns long-term, at least not until they become genuinely conscious of them, which is the whole point of everything described in this exploration of Jung's enduring framework. The integration test gives you one more tool: gently reflect someone's projection back at them and observe what they do with the reflection you offer. Their response will tell you nearly everything about their real capacity for self-awareness and growth in every area of life that matters to you. And the most powerful application of all of this is the one closest to home. Keep a trigger journal. Notice your own reactions under pressure every day. Ask yourself, when your defenses rise, what is this really about? The journey towards self-awareness is not a destination you eventually arrive at and declare finished. It is a practice you commit to, imperfectly and incrementally, over a lifetime. It is the slow, sometimes uncomfortable work of becoming more honest with yourself daily, more compassionate toward others, and more genuinely present in your own experience as you move through the clutter and difficulty of an ordinary human life. Every time you choose that kind of honest self-examination over the comfortable illusion of a perfectly maintained persona, you are doing something that genuinely matters. Not just for yourself, but for everyone in your orbit. Because the willingness to be real is, in its own quiet way, contagious. And that is where it ends and begins again.